Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander barefoot through the dew-heavy dawn of Tenochtitlan, the old jewel of the Valley of Mexico, where the gardens don't just grow, they float, they whisper, and some of them seem to judge your posture. You'll find yourself surrounded by mist, reeds brushing your knees, while ducks paddle by with the suspicious expression of grumpy librarians. Here, the soil isn't just dirt, it's a living manuscript. The air smells like wet clay and wild marigold, and the water beneath the wooden walkways reflects the pink of a waking sky. But take it slow. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting modern sidewalks, bug spray, or a quick Starbucks run. Here, you're wearing woven sandals and a tunic that clings just slightly too much in the morning fog. There's no Wi-Fi unless you count the ripple of wind as gossip, and if you wander off the path, there's always a non-zero chance you'll step directly into a canal and be gently laughed at by passing farmers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly along a narrow plank pathway, one of many that lead like sleepy veins through the legendary chinampas, the Aztec floating gardens. Well, not quite floating. They're more like buoyant earth lasagna. Mud, reeds, compost, more mud. The result, a fertile patch of land in the middle of a lake, too rich to be real and just stable enough that your left sandal doesn't sink entirely. Mist rises from the shallow waters of Lake Xochimilco, softening everything. You pause to watch a fisherman in a canoe glide past, throwing a net with the casual grace of someone who's been doing this since before breakfast meant coffee. The city behind you, Tenochtitlan, is just beginning to wake. You can hear the faint clang of stone grinding corn, the distant notes of a wooden flute, and the rustle of fabric as market vendors set up stalls. It smells of masa, wood smoke, and wild basil. If cities could stretch, this one would be yawning. You're not alone out here in the garden maze. A small boy passes you, expertly balancing a basket of red amaranth leaves on his head, not even pretending to look smug about it. You nod. He doesn't nod back. You're new here. Your tunic is wrinkled. Your hands are too clean, and you clearly don't know which leaves not to eat. It's okay. They'll warm up to you eventually, or they won't. Either way, you're here, among the chinampas, and that means you're already part of something very old and very alive. The gardens are dazzling rows of maize taller than you, sunflowers the size of serving platters, tomato vines that curl like they're trying to sneak off to a party. Between plots, there are narrow canals, their surfaces broken by the lazy V-shapes of gliding ducks and the occasional water snake doing its best impression of a lost shoelace. You bend down to touch the soil. It's dark and springy, fragrant in a way modern potting mix never quite gets right. It smells like rain remembering a good joke. You dig your fingers in. A nearby gardener raises an eyebrow, not in disapproval, more like curiosity. You're doing okay, actually. Fun fact, modern botanists have long marveled at how chinampas were able to support dense populations with almost no soil exhaustion. The system recycled nutrients so efficiently that even today, many scientists consider it a model of sustainable agriculture. Historians still argue whether the technique was independently invented here or refined from older Mesoamerican methods. Either way, it worked flawlessly for centuries. A frog hops past your foot, pauses, and gives you the kind of look that says, "You're late." You move on. A group of women in colorful huipils is tending to a corner of the chinampa that glows with strange light. It's not magic, just an especially healthy patch of marigolds catching the morning sun. One of the women hums as she works, a lilting tune that sounds suspiciously like something your grandma might have hummed while making soup. She sees you, smiles, and nods to a nearby patch of something leafy and purple. "You can help with the quillites," she says. You nod, though you have no idea what that means. You squat beside the plants. They smell earthy, like spinach with ambition. She hands you a bundle of twine. You begin tying them in little bundles, trying to mimic her deft movements. You're not great at it. Your first bundle looks like a nervous tumbleweed, but she doesn't laugh. She just chuckles softly and says, even the plants start out tangled. Later, you're invited to share a small breakfast on a reed mat. Blue corn tortillas, mashed beans, and squash blossoms sprinkled with dried chili powder. There's a clay cup of something warm and chocolatey, spiced and faintly bitter. It's exocolatl ancient hot chocolate, minus the sugar crash. The drink is dense enough to double as conversation, and you sip slowly while listening to a nearby old man tell a story about a tomato that predicted the weather. You smile, maybe because it sounds ridiculous, or maybe because you secretly hope it's true. Everything in the garden has a job, he says, even the lazy ones. He nods toward a pigeon snoozing on a cornstalk. You lean back. The mist has lifted now, and the lake glistens like silver glass. Dragonflies flit by, wings catching every bit of sunlight like shards of stained glass. Somewhere in the distance, a flute resumes playing. You close your eyes for just a moment. In that breath, something strange and lovely happens. The scent of marigold deepens. The soil under your palm seems to pulse softly, and for a heartbeat, you're no longer just a visitor. You're part of the rhythm, a root system, a ripple. You are the garden, and somewhere, you think, the garden is vaguely amused about that. You're still there, knee-deep in morning light, and halfway through, pretending to know how to harvest quailites, when one of the gardeners beckons to you with a grin that says, "You're about to get muddy. Come," she says. "Let's look at the chinampa beds, real ones, not just the tourist ones." You glance down at your sandals, still damp from earlier. They sigh softly, accepting their fate. You follow her over a narrow, swaying bridge that connects one floating island to the next, where the plants grow thicker, taller, wilder, as if they've been told not to behave for outsiders. This is where you learn about raised beds, but not the kind you assemble with pine boards and leftover optimism. Aztec raised beds were architectural marvels. Picture this. The lake's surface is crisscrossed with floating parcels of land anchored by willow trees. The trees hold the edges in place with their roots, like wise elders gripping the corners of a blanket. Then comes the layering mud, silt, decaying plants. And here's the best part: strategic compost. You kneel down at the edge of one such bed. It's spongy underfoot, but solid. Like walking on a perfectly baked brownie. Everything comes back around, your guide says, gesturing to a basket full of plant trimmings, spoiled squash, and what may or may not be fish bones. She tosses it all into a nearby pit with the flair of a magician, discarding a deck of cards. Even the bad parts, she's talking about compost, but it feels philosophical. Mainstream historians agree. The Aztecs developed one of the most advanced urban agriculture systems in the pre-modern world. It fed hundreds of thousands of people, minimized waste, and required virtually no artificial fertilizer. In modern terms, it was the dream of every permaculture enthusiast with a backyard and too many YouTube tabs open. Historians still debate whether the chinampas were more effective per square meter than modern industrial agriculture. And the answer might be yes, if you can keep your ducks in line. You hear a splash behind you. One duck, perhaps offended by your thoughts, has launched itself dramatically into the canal. The gardeners don't use pitchforks or tractors here. Their tools are humble, carved wooden shovels, long sticks for measuring bed depth, and bundles of dried reeds used like very determined feather dusters. One gardener, an older man with a sun hat woven so tightly it could repel sarcasm, shows you how he layers each chinampa over time. First come the water lilies, harvested from the lake and left to rot slightly, because who doesn't love a fragrant base layer? Then the silt, scooped up from the bottom of the lake using a long, awkward pole that might also double as a fishing rod when nobody's watching. Then the mulch, a mix of corn husks, cactus trimmings, old tortilla bits, and ceremonial flower petals that no one had the heart to throw away. The result is nutrient-rich soil so dark it could swallow secrets. You reach down and grab a handful. It smells faintly sweet like wet leaves and celebration. A hummingbird zips by your head, close enough to ruffle your hair. You're lucky, the old gardener mutters. They don't always approve of newcomers. You nod solemnly. You have clearly passed some sort of unspoken, nectar-related test. Further along the chinampa, you spot a curious mound. At first, you think it's just a pile of weeds, but as you approach, it starts to hum, low and steady. The gardener explains. It's a compost pile that's been singing thanks to a carefully buried clay jar filled with air holes. The fermenting mass inside creates warmth, vibration, and the occasional faint sound like an exhausted tuba. It calms the corn, he says. You laugh, but he doesn't. Modern botanists might scoff, or maybe not. Some have begun to explore the idea that plants respond to sound vibrations. Not just music, but voices, footsteps, even tone. And sure, there's no conclusive evidence that a singing compost pile makes a happier tomato. But you've also never seen such robust kale anywhere else. Historians still argue whether Aztec gardeners truly believed in plant communication, or whether it was more about ritual than science. Either way, the humming mound keeps doing its thing. Lunch is offered, again, on another reed mat. This time it's tamales filled with Huitlacoche corn fungus. But make it fancy. You hesitate, then bite in. It's earthy, smoky, surprisingly poetic. The gardener watches your expression carefully and nods once, approvingly. Now full of compost wisdom and fungal confidence, you are ushered to a new part of the garden, the shade crops. Here, beneath carefully constructed reed shelters, grow herbs you've never seen before, something that smells like lavender but burns like cinnamon, another that tastes like peppered mint, a third that looks like lettuce but crunches like cold celery on a winter morning. You reach to pluck a leaf, but a hand stops you gently. That one's for the spirits, says your guide, smiling. Unless you want to dream of jaguars tonight, you let the leaf go. The air is thicker here, not heavy, but full like the pause before a good song's chorus. There are bees, of course, chubby ones that bumble through blossoms with all the urgency of someone late for tea. You watch them move from plant to plant like tiny librarians cross-referencing secrets. It's said that in the height of Aztec farming, there were over 40 edible species of plants cultivated in these floating plots. Many of them have since disappeared, eaten to extinction, forgotten, or replaced by their louder, shinier cousins. But here, among the raised beds and humming compost, you get the feeling those old flavors are still waiting, patiently, like elders who know you'll come back around eventually. You reach a final chinampa, just as the sun peaks above the mountains. This one is ringed by tall amaranth plants, red and gold and whispering in the breeze. The gardener here barefoot, missing 2 teeth, and clearly some kind of wizard hands you a small bowl of seeds. These were sacred, he says, as you tip them into your palm, used in festivals, medicine, and sometimes breakfast. You chew one absent-mindedly. It pops like a tiny firecracker, nutty, sweet. You suddenly understand why the Spanish were a bit unnerved by the whole thing. And as you sit there, palm full of sacred snacks, surrounded by floating gardens older than most modern countries, a soft breeze rustles through the maze. It says nothing, but it also says everything. You stretch your legs, trying not to knock over a precariously stacked basket of corn husks that seems to be judging your core strength. A young gardener waves you forward with the kind of enthusiasm only someone who has not yet had to clean compost out of their sandals can muster. You need to see how we water the beds, he says. It's complicated, and also not. So, of course, you follow him. The sun's higher now, casting a bright sheen over the chinampas. The water between the plots looks like silver cloth being slowly unrolled. You squint on the far side of the canal. 2 figures are crouched next to what looks like an oversized spoon attached to a very old piece of bamboo. Meet our irrigation system, the boy says proudly, also known as this pole that leaks in just the right places. You're skeptical? Then you're impressed. Because the Aztec irrigation system so low-tech it makes a garden hose look excessive is actually genius. Picture this, shallow canals that don't just separate the garden beds, but feed them. Each chinampa is slightly raised, allowing water to wick upward through the soil, like tea into a biscuit. No hoses, no buckets, just carefully guided lake water, pulled along using gravity, slanted platforms, and the occasional very strategic ditch. You trail behind as the boy demonstrates how the canals are opened or closed with bundles of reeds and clay bricks. It's like watching someone play Jenga underwater. A misstep sends a gush toward a bed of squash, which flutters its enormous leaves in what can only be interpreted as applause. See, he grins. No sprinkler required. Historians still debate whether these irrigation methods were fully planned in advance, or if they evolved gradually through experimentation. Some suggest they were copied from older Olmec or Mixtec techniques. Others argue the Aztecs simply watched the lake and paid attention. Either way, it worked so well that some parts of modern Mexico City still rely on chinampa-fed agriculture. You try your hand at shifting a reed plug from one ditch to another. It's heavier than it looks and smells like lake mud and questionable life choices. The water rushes forward with a slosh, almost catching your sandal as it surges. The boy cheers. The nearby ducks look unconvinced. You wipe your hands on your tunic and follow him farther along the chinampa edge. Here, you spot something unexpected. A cluster of large clay pots half buried in the soil, rimmed with damp moss and surrounded by herbs. You gesture at them, eyebrows raised. Those, he says, ulas, buried pots. You fill them with water and they slowly leak into the roots. You peer inside one. There's a toad in it. The toad seems perfectly comfortable and in no mood to be disturbed. You learn quickly that Aztec farmers didn't just water from the top. They understood that plants, like people, often drink best from the base quietly, efficiently, without a lot of fuss. So they used porous clay containers, filled them at dawn, and let the moisture seep slowly into the soil. The result, deep roots, happy crops, and far less water wasted. You think about your own sad houseplants back home and feel a twinge of guilt. Even the fish help, the boy adds, leading you to a spot where a small inlet from the canal swirls lazily around the roots of some young maize. There's movement in the waterfish, small and darting. Tilapia, maybe, or something older. They eat the bugs, poop into the water. That feeds the plants. You pause. So, it's like a water-based compost loop. He beams. Exactly. You're getting it. You nod slowly. The Aztecs were doing aquaponics before it had a trendy name and required a TED Talk. Later, as the light shifts to that buttery mid-morning gold, you're invited to help with one of the more delicate tasks, trimming the trailing vines that have grown across the narrow canals. Your job is simple: cut the vines before they reach the neighboring plots, or you'll accidentally create a botanical turf war. You take a pair of obsidian shears, a tool so sharp it once doubled as surgical equipment, and start snipping. The vines curl back like startled cats. A few snips in, and you're finding your rhythm. Clip, toss, clip, toss. But then, one vine moves before you touch it. You blink. Was that twitching? Your guide notices. Don't touch that one. It belongs to Senora Melita's plot. Why? Because it always grows back stronger and angrier. You back away slowly. No sense in offending an emotionally unstable gourd vine. You pass other tools along the way. Long-handled spades, carved bone scoops, gourd ladles, and something that looks suspiciously like a back scratcher, but is used to stir mulch. Each is handmade, some decorated with geometric carvings, others with little animal faces worn smooth by generations of use. You hold one. A flat shovel made from a split branch and hardened with sap. The wood is soft and warm in your hands, like it remembers 100 previous owners. It's not efficient by modern standards, but it feels right. A woman walks past, holding a bouquet of herbs so pungent they register as both spice and social commentary. She nods at your shovel. That one's named Paco, she says, without slowing down. You spend the next 15 minutes wondering if she was joking. Lunch today is roasted squash, red beans, and a salsa made with something that causes a very mild existential crisis when it hits your tongue. It's bright, smoky, slightly bitter, and exactly what you didn't know you wanted. You ask what's in it. The answer involves ground seeds, 3 kinds of chile, and a flower that blooms only under full moons. You sip cool water from a gourd bowl and watch the sun sparkle on the canal. Dragonflies buzz lazily. A nearby gardener is laughing at something a frog did. You don't know what, but it must have been hilarious. As the day warms, you're shown a shaded pergola draped with climbing beans. The structure isn't just decorative, it cools the garden beds below, creates windbreaks, and makes a decent hammock if you bribe the right person. You lean against one of the posts, eyes half-lidded. Bees drift by, heavy with pollen. Somewhere, someone is grinding maize by hand in slow, rhythmic circles. And that's when it hits you. This place isn't just growing food, it's composing something. Each garden bed, each canal, each misplaced sandal, They're part of a living, humming poem. You smile. The water gurgles in reply. You wake, if you were ever fully asleep, curled beside a shade vine, your head resting on a bundled cloak. Someone kindly tossed your way when you began to nod off. The air has shifted slightly, warmer, now buzzier, somewhere to your left. A gardener is snoring in rhythm with the ducks. You rise slowly, knees creaking with theatrical flair, and stretch toward the sun. A voice calls to you, an older woman, one hand on her hip, the other cradling what appears to be a basket of flower petals and maybe feathers. "Time to meet the sunflowers," she says, smiling like it's both an invitation and a dare. You follow. The sunflower field is dazzling. Tall golden towers sway in unison, heads turned sharply toward the sky like they're watching a very dramatic soap opera play out in the clouds. The petals glow with that near-metallic shimmer sunflowers get when they're too healthy for their own good. You take a cautious step between them, and the entire field seems to pivot slightly to acknowledge your presence. "No pressure. These are not just flowers," the woman says, her fingers brushing a blossom like she's greeting an old friend. "They're informants." You raise an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "They tell us things. The sun, the moisture, sometimes gossip about the corn." You wait, expecting a laugh. None arrives. Sunflowers. It turns out, were more than ornamental in the Aztec world. They were used in rituals, medicines, and even economic forecasting, at least. Unofficially, gardeners noticed that when the heads drooped too soon, a dry spell was on its way. When they grew taller than usual, something in the soil had shifted, and if they bloomed off schedule, well, that meant someone had buried something unusual nearby. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs had a formal system for reading plant behavior, or if it was simply generational wisdom passed down through elbow nudges and squinting at leaves. But one thing's for sure, people paid attention. You crouch beside a particularly smug-looking flower, its golden face tilted just slightly higher than the rest. "That one's dramatic," the woman says, always facing away from the others, like it has secrets. You nod respectfully at the sunflower. It rustles faintly in reply. As you walk deeper into the field, she tells you about her grandmother, who used to whisper to each plant as she passed. She believed they remembered her voice. The woman explains, especially the rude ones. You pass rows of squash, then marigolds, then tall stalks of amaranth with tiny crimson blossoms that look like fireworks paused mid-burst. In the middle of it all stands a shrine of sorts, a bundle of sticks, corn husks, feathers, and an obsidian shard tucked into the soil. "For the garden spirits," she explains. "And to keep the gophers honest." The idea of a gopher with a moral compass is oddly comforting. Then she hands you a basket. Inside are several small bundles of herbs tied with red thread, a piece of obsidian, and what appears to be a very disgruntled chili pepper. "Deliver these to the maize field," she says. "Third chinampa from the east. Past the floating papayas. The maize likes gifts." You nod solemnly. "The maize always likes gifts." You set off with the basket, passing over a narrow plank bridge just wide enough to test your commitment to balance. The papayas, bobbing gently in their watery garden cradles, smell like sun-warmed candy and overripe gossip. Then you arrive. The maize field is quieter than the rest. Not silent, exactly. There's still the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, but it feels reverent, as if you've stepped into the temple part of the garden. The stalks are tall, taller than you, some of them by several feet, and they lean together at the tops like gossiping aunties. You step between them, feeling their silk tassels brush your cheeks. Here, maize isn't just a plant. It's an ancestor, a deity, a whole cosmology you can eat for breakfast. You kneel in the soft earth and place the gifts into a small depression at the base of a central stalk. Obsidian, herbs, pepper. Then you sprinkle a few drops of water from a nearby gourd. Nothing dramatic happens. No lightning, no whispered thanks, but the breeze shifts. The leaves rustle, and the stalk in front of you straightens just slightly. It's probably nothing. You move on. Back at the main garden hub, you're handed a cup of pulque, a fermented agave drink that tastes like someone lovingly misinterpreted yogurt. You sip slowly. It's surprisingly pleasant once your tongue stops panicking. A gardener leans against a post beside you. "You know," he says, "we used to talk about corn like it had moods." You tilt your head. "Some mornings." The stalks would lean away from the sun, other days, toward it. We thought it meant the gods were whispering, or the ground was angry, or that someone had spilled pulque where they shouldn't have. Did anyone write that down? He shrugs. Writing doesn't hold those kinds of moods. The gardens do. You sit with that for a moment. Modern botanists have, in fact, documented plant movement in response to stimuli: light, temperature, even touch. It's called nastic movement, and while it's no proof that your corn has opinions, it certainly adds weight to the idea that plants are paying attention. Historians still argue whether these ancient observations count as science or spirituality. But standing here, pulque in hand, watching a line of maize rustle like it's sharing a private joke, you decide it doesn't really matter. A little later, you're invited to help with an experiment, an odd one. A group of children is trying to see if playing different flutes near the squash patch affects growth. One flute is made of bone, another of clay, a third of river reed. They play tunes sweet, rambling, off-key, and the adults watch the plants with amused skepticism. You ask what they expect to see. Nothing obvious, someone says. But if the vines reach toward the bone flute again, we'll know. You smile. It's the kind of experiment that wouldn't pass peer review, but might just earn a nod from the maize. As the sun begins to dip, the sunflower field catches the light once more, glowing like a golden sea. You watch as the heads turn slowly, deliberately, toward the horizon. No two exactly the same. Some cautious, some bold. One particularly cheeky one winks at the moonrise, and in that soft, sun-drenched moment, you realize these plants aren't just growing, they're remembering. Evening approaches, and with it comes the long, golden yawn of the chinampas, the hour when the light slants, the water cools, and the insects hum like they've just discovered jazz. You think about heading back toward the central hearth, but someone calls you by name. Well, not your name exactly. A version of it with extra syllables and a lilt at the end that sounds like a question. You turn to find a lanky young man in a tunic so stained with soil it might be considered camo in Chinampa society. He waves you over to a plot bordered by low, woven fencing and dotted with little flags made from agave fiber. You want to hear the story of the talking corn, he says, gesturing at a particularly regal maize plant with tassels like a dignified elder's hair. Of course you do. You settle on an overturned basket, which creaks like it's deeply disappointed in your posture, and he begins. There was once a stalk of corn that grew straighter than all the others, taller, stronger, too strong, maybe. People said it came from a seed gifted by the rain god himself. He leans in conspiratorially, but it was mouthy. According to the tale, the corn began whispering at night softly at first, just a rustle or a word, then more. Complaints about the soil, suggestions for nearby squash, full conversations with passing hummingbirds. The villagers were torn. Some said it was a blessing. Others claimed it was a trick of the wind. A few swore the corn was just opinionated. Eventually, he says with a grin, someone tried to cook it. You gasp. It screamed loudly. The tamales unraveled themselves. The pot cracked. The kitchen dog fled and became a cloud. You blink. And then, he shrugs, they built a shrine. It's still here, somewhere. I think the talking stopped after that, or maybe it just got more polite. You glance around nervously at the surrounding stalks. They sway slightly, conspiratorially. You give a small bow, just in case, as fantastical as the tale sounds. The reverence for maize in Aztec culture was very real. It wasn't just a staple crop, it was a god, a calendar, a life cycle. Maize was present at births, deaths, marriages, and more or less every meal in between. Rituals were performed before planting, and again, before harvesting. Some scholars argue maize was the cultural center of the Aztec world politically, spiritually, and economically. And, yes, sometimes dramatically. You walk on. The next garden patch is quiet and fragrant. Something spicy in the air, chili peppers, perhaps, or one of those herbs that smells like an argument between oregano and licorice. A woman is crouched near a circular stone slab, grinding seeds with a motion so practiced it looks unconscious. She nods toward you and pats the stone. You want to learn how to speak with the dough. You think she's joking? She's not. You sit beside her. She places a handful of soaked maize kernels on the stone, then presses them gently beneath the matot, a traditional grinder. With a slow, rhythmic back-and-forth motion, she works the maize into a thick, fragrant paste. The smell is warm, nutty, almost floral. Every batch is different, she murmurs. Sometimes it says yes, sometimes it says no. Sometimes it says you forgot to thank the beans. You try the motion yourself. The maze resists at first, slippery and defiant, but eventually gives way, becoming soft, pliable, even cooperative. Better, she says. It likes you. From a scholarly standpoint, there's no peer-reviewed article explaining dough-based communication, but from an experiential one, you can see how someone might believe it. The paste does seem to respond to your mood. It rolls differently when you're tense. It relaxes when you hum. It flattens into perfect ovals when you stop trying too hard. She wraps a bit of the paste in a corn husk, adds a spoonful of dark mole, and folds it expertly. Tamale, she says, but also a conversation. Later, around a shared fire, everyone eats. Your tamale is spicier than expected, possibly revenge for some earlier offense. But it's delicious, and you eat slowly, the heat curling in your throat like a sleepy dragon. Across the fire, an elder begins telling a story. You don't catch all the words, but you hear phrases like sky beans, laughing cactus, and the goat who tricked the moon. You sip something warm and spicy from a carved cup and lean back, letting the rhythms of the story blur into the crackle of the fire and the rustle of the reeds. Mainstream historians might dismiss these stories as folk tales, distractions from the more important agricultural facts. But out here, with your hands still smelling faintly of corn and smoke, you realize something. These stories are part of the system. They teach, remember, warn, amusa. They pass on planting cycles, pest control, even weather predictions wrapped in humor, exaggeration, and the occasional enchanted squash. Historians still argue whether the fusion of myth and method in Aztec gardening was intentional or instinctive, but the gardeners themselves seem unconcerned. They plant, they tell stories, they laugh, they harvest, and the gardens thrive. A breeze picks up, sending sparks spiraling skyward. You watch them rise, drift, fade like small, glowing prayers. A frog chirps, the ducks settle in like squishy boats. The corn rustles something that sounds suspiciously like applause. You yawn, unintentionally dramatic, and someone hands you a folded blanket woven from maguey fiber. It's surprisingly soft. You nestle beside a stalk of amaranth that smells faintly of honey and dust, and listen as the final story of the evening begins. It's about a chili pepper that fell in love with a gourd. You smile. You believe it? The next morning starts before you're ready for it, because in chinampa time, dawn isn't an event. It's a rising, a soft creeping, a decision made by birds and frogs long before you finish dreaming about that chili pepper's romantic misadventures. You blink awake, squinting through a haze of golden mist, and realize someone has gently placed a small bowl of warm atoll-sweetened maize porridge next to your sleeping mat. You sip, cautiously. It tastes like breakfast in memory. Your first guide of the day appears out of the reeds. She's elderly, but moves like someone who hasn't lost a race since the calendar was invented. We're digging, she says simply, handing you a shovel that looks older than sarcasm. Today, you're learning about soil, more specifically, how obsessed the Aztecs were with it. Your guide explains with a twinkle in her eye that dirt wasn't just dirt. It was a living, breathing substance, something you read, interpreted, and sometimes negotiated with. Before planting, they'd test it by touch, smell, and color. Too gray, needs ash. Too yellow, add lake mud. Too clumpy, give it to the ducks. You assume that last one's a joke? You are wrong. She leads you to a trench where several layers of earth are exposed like a cake, baked by a very patient geologist. Each one tells a story, she says. She points. This was a wet year. Too many mosquitoes. This one, that was a good year. No wind. Lazy frogs. Fat beans. You crouch beside her, running your fingers through the loamy layers. The soil is soft, darker the deeper you go, and rich with tiny roots and beetles who seem slightly annoyed to see you. Modern soil science confirms what she's saying. Dark, crumbly loam rich in organic matter holds water better, releases nutrients more gradually, and supports stronger root systems. The Aztecs knew this, not through satellite imaging or pH meters, but through centuries of observation, experimentation, and listening to dirt. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was systematically taught or picked up informally. But here, Everyone seems to carry it as easily as they carry firewood or song lyrics. You're shown how to mix a perfect compost batch, equal parts green fresh leaves, kitchen scraps, brown dead stalks, dry flowers, and mysterious crushed insects, fish scales, eggshells that may or may not be ceremonial. The pile steams gently in the cool morning air. You poke it once and it squirms. That means it's working, your guide says cheerfully. Then come the worms. Oh, the worms. You're led to a large clay bowl covered with a reed mat. It's lifted, and inside is a writhing tangle of glossy, pinkish-brown earthworms that look unnervingly pleased. These are our co-gardeners, she explains. They eat, they poop, they make everything better. You nod respectfully. Worms were revered, in a way. Their castings, yes. Worm poop were collected, dried, and sprinkled like holy dust across the beds. Rich in nutrients, these tiny offerings fed the maize and beans and squash with almost magical results. You're handed a small scoop and tasked with redistributing the castings among several rows of young beans. The scoop feels oddly ceremonial, like you're performing a rite. The beans quiver slightly when the soil is added. You convince yourself it's wind. A young boy approaches with a jar. He opens it. Inside is a single, spectacularly large worm. His name is Senor Wiggle, he says solemnly. He's in charge. You nod, obviously. Lunch is strange today. Something called mixiote, a packet of marinated vegetables and herbs wrapped in maguey leaves and slow roasted over embers. It smells like lemon and secrets. The outer leaf unwraps like a scroll, revealing a stew so tender it nearly evaporates. You ask what's in it. Root vegetables, they say, and a bit of mystery. After lunch, you're invited to one of the more peculiar rituals in the chinampa cycle, dirt singing. Yes, singing. To dirt, a group of women gather near a central plot, each holding a clay bowl of compost or lake silt. They begin to hum, low, rhythmic tones, barely louder than a bee's buzz. Then they step in unison across the garden beds, spreading the material in spiraling patterns. You join hesitantly, bowl in hand, voice somewhere between unsure and mosquito. Still, no one laughs. The compost spreads, the soil breathes, and somehow you feel like you're doing it right. Later, an old man explains, the vibrations help the roots settle, and it calms the worms. You never thought about worm anxiety before. You think about it now. Modern researchers are beginning to explore the role of sound in plant development. Some studies suggest that low-frequency vibrations may stimulate root growth or stress resilience. Is it real? Is it myth? Does it matter? Historians still argue whether rituals like dirt singing were symbolic, spiritual, or practical. But here, it just feels natural. By mid-afternoon, you find yourself back near the sunflower plot, where a small group is constructing something out of woven reeds, mud bricks, and lots of unsolicited advice from passing elders. It's a compost hut, part storage, part shrine, part social gathering place. You help haul in bundles of dry stalks. Amazed at how light yet sturdy they are, the hut takes shape quickly, round and squat, with a little carved frog above the doorway. You ask about the frog. He keeps the mold in line. Of course he does. Inside the hut, the compost is sorted into stages: fresh, steamy, mellow, and ready. Each batch smells different. Each has its own attending caretaker. They speak to the piles as they stir them. You catch snippets, requests, jokes, reminders not to overheat. You can't help it. You talk to your pile, too. You ask it if you're doing this right, if your stirring technique is up to par, if Senor Wiggle would be proud. The pile does not answer, but it does seem a little fluffier. As the sun begins to lower, you step outside the hut and find the world bathed in golden green. Everything is luminous. Even the compost hut has taken on a sort of quiet glow. You stand still, breathe in. The air is thick with chlorophyll and old stories. You realize that here, in this rhythm of compost and root and story and worm, nothing is ever wasted. Not even you. You're ankle deep in water again, though this time it's on purpose. Today's assignment is irrigation maintenance, which sounds dry. But out here in Chinampa land, even the plumbing is a kind of poetry. The canals need cleaning, not just to keep water flowing, but because, as one gardener explains, it's rude to make the fish push debris around. You nod, apologetically eyeing a floating clump of algae that looks like it has opinions. You're handed a long-handled rake with a split end and a suspicious amount of personal history burned into its handle. It feels heavier than necessary, like it's been absorbing sarcasm for decades. And as you pull it through the shallows, globs of mud and leaves slop satisfyingly onto the bank. Irrigation, your guide mutters, is just gardening's love language. You grin. And what's this part? You ask, hoisting out a large, half-submerged chunk of tree root. Passive-aggressive flirting, he says. You continue dragging. Water sloshes. Small frogs relocate with theatrical sighs. Tiny fish dart away from your shadow like you've been oversharing on a first date. The canals, you realize, are more than just water highways. They're an entire nervous system. They carry nutrients, regulate temperature, host fish that nibble on pests, and serve as one of the oldest examples of what we'd now call closed-loop systems. Essentially, every part feeds every other part. Everything circles back. Mainstream historians recognize the genius of it, a blend of ecological intuition and structural planning that rivals many modern systems. The idea of digging canals not just for drainage but for nutrition, to help crops drink from below. That's advanced. That's elegant. That's annoyingly effective for something with no PVC pipe. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs developed this on their own or built on Toltec or Teotihuacan ideas, but the fact remains it worked so well that, even now, some modern farmers in Xochimilco are reviving these methods to combat drought and soil exhaustion. You pause to admire the infrastructure. Low, woven reed fences line the canal edges, not just to hold soil in, but to slow water and collect debris. Floating plant mats glide by accidental compost barges, ferrying future soil. A boy floats past in a canoe, lazily tossing seeds into the water like he's feeding daydreams. You see, your guide says, squinting at a bend in the canal. No pumps, no waste, just a patient loop. You reach a section where the canal meets a larger aqueduct, one of the many that once brought fresh water from the springs to the city center. The aqueduct is impressive. Wide, stone-lined, still flowing despite the centuries. It's both architectural and humble, like a genius who doesn't correct your grammar. You sit on the edge, feet dangling above the cool rush. This, your guide says, gesturing grandly, is our plumbing, and our fish market, and our emergency bathtub. Someone down the path yells that your help is needed trimming the willow roots. You wave, promising to come after finishing your water break, which in this context means quietly staring into the canal for an unreasonable amount of time. A dragonfly lands on your knee. You dare not move. Eventually, you're handed a bundle of tools and led to a fence made entirely of cactus. Yes, cactus. Tall, paddle-shaped segments of prickly pear are planted in rows to form a living wall green, spiny, and slightly judgmental. The purpose, everything. Fences, windbreaks, erosion control, and if you're lucky, snacks. You're given the task of trimming back the outer edges, making sure the wall doesn't encroach on the walkway. You take the knife, thick-bladed and worn smooth at the handle, and begin slicing. It's weirdly satisfying. The cut segments bleed a clear, slimy sap. Your guide catches some in a bowl and nods. This will go into paint, or glue, or hair gel. If we're being honest, cactus fences aren't unique to the Aztecs, but here they serve a special role. Natural boundaries that keep out pests, mark planting zones, and occasionally act as spiritual buffers. Some segments are etched with symbols, tiny carvings of maize heads, water glyphs, or animals. You trace one with your finger. A hummingbird, wings outstretched. You'll see more of those tonight. Your guide says they visit the squash blossoms. Sure enough, nearby is a squash plot, large and unruly, vines spilling over edges like gossip. Each leaf is broad and fuzzy, each flower loud and orange. You're invited to help pollinate. No bees today. The gardener shrugs. They're on break. You take a small brush and gently dab the inside of a male flower, then touch it to the female blossom, like you're whispering a secret. It's absurdly tender work, sacred, even. You're told that certain families used to assign this job only to children because their hands were the right size, and they had the patience to do it properly. Also, they couldn't talk back as much. Lunch today is a simple spread: grilled Nepal's cactus paddles, beans, and a salsa made with something alarmingly red and enthusiastically spicy. You bite in, cough once, and receive a nod of respect from someone 3 plots away. First time, they ask, you nod, eyes watering, pride intact. In the late afternoon, you're brought to a quiet patch of chinampa nestled under the canopy of young willow trees. Here, the gardeners rest, not nap, necessarily, but lounge, snack, braid reed cord, and tell stories. You're offered a mat. You sit. Someone hands you a carved gourd bowl filled with a drink that tastes like tamarind, lime, and someone's childhood memory of fireworks. You sip. It's perfect. Conversation here flows like the canal, soft, winding, occasionally carrying something profound. One gardener tells a story about a bean plant that grew faster the more secrets she told it. Another swears her grandmother once cured a cough by singing to a pumpkin. They're laughing now, not at the absurdity, but at the possibility. You watch the way they lean into the soil, not just working it, but joining it. You see the irrigation channels shining in the light, the fish flicking beneath the surface, the way the squash flowers twitch when a breeze passes through. Everything here works together, deliberate, cyclical, slow. You can't rush it. You wouldn't wanna. You close your eyes for a moment, just to feel the wind on your skin, the light through your eyelids, the hum of the water in your ears. A nearby willow leaf brushes your hand, and just before sleep can pull you under, you hear someone whisper, amused, careful, the squash is watching. The next day begins with something unexpected. Music, not the kind you might hear from a pipe or flute, but a slow, drumming rhythm, soft and distant, like a heartbeat hiding behind a reed curtain. You blink awake, still curled beneath a maguey fiber blanket, and sit up to find your current surroundings noticeably woven. You'd been moved. It seems, during the night, someone, a person, a very thoughtful maize god, tucked you beneath a small lean-to draped in flowering vines and maguey leaves. You suspect it's the chinampa version of We Like You Enough Not to Let the Dew Soak Your Socks. You emerge just in time to follow the music. It leads you to an open area near the edge of the cultivated plots, where the soil shifts from structured and orderly to wildly tangled and experimental patch. Someone explains, a kind of garden laboratory, where trial crops, strange hybrids, and forgotten seeds are allowed to grow however they like. It's also where we keep the fancy tools, your new guide says, holding up what can only be described as a machete with style. The blade is curved like a crescent moon and etched with swirling patterns along the spine. The handle, wrapped in colorful fiber, adorned with what appear to be tiny dried chili peppers. This, he declares, is how you prune with flair. You take it reverently. The balance is perfect. The edge gleams with the kind of confidence normally reserved for sword fighters and very smug paring knives. Aztec tools, as it turns out, weren't just functional. They were fashion statements. Obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical steel. Digging sticks made of polished hardwood, shaped for both efficiency and elegance. Carved stone implements worn smooth by generations of use, often passed down like family heirlooms. One woman shows you her grandmother's planting knife. It's wrapped in a cloth embroidered with a small maze and the words, "Return what feeds you." She doesn't let anyone else use it. She hands it to you for exactly 3 seconds. You nearly cry. Historians still debate how much of the Aztec tool-making tradition was purely practical versus ceremonial. But out here, no one separates the two. Every object is both workhorse and artifact. Everything has history, personality, sometimes even a mood. You're led to the storage hut, where a row of implements hangs on the wall like museum pieces. A short-handled axe gleams beside a reed broom, both with decorative touches, painted feathers, copper inlay, symbolic glyphs burned into the wood. And of course, there's the ceremonial digging stick. It's long, straight, with a carved obsidian tip and tiny bone rattles that clink gently as you move it. You're told it's only used for planting the first seeds of the season, never for weeding, never for harvesting. Too proud? Your guide explains. It refuses to touch anything that's already grown. You take it outside, where today's task is less about maintenance and more about listening. Your guide points to a half-cleared patch of earth and says, "We're going to find out what this garden wants to become." You pause. Is this a test? It's more like speed dating for seeds. You laugh, then kneel. They hand you a small pouch filled with assorted kernels, seeds, and pods, some maize, some squash, some things you absolutely cannot identify. Each one is different. Some are smooth and polished, others rough or flecked with strange markings. You plant slowly, placing each seed with care, watching how the soil receives it. Sometimes, the earth seems to pull it in greedily. Other times, it lets the seed sit on top, as if considering whether this is a good idea. This one's tricky. Your guide says, placing a wrinkled black bean into a shallow depression only grows when it thinks no one is watching. You keep planting. Nearby, someone's humming a tune you don't recognize, though it sounds like it was written by clouds. The rhythm falls into step with your breath, your movements, your thoughts. You finish the last row and sit back, hands covered in dark soil, palms smelling of earth and possibility. After a short rest, interrupted only by a lizard climbing across your foot like you were part of the landscape, you join another gardener preparing paint. Yes, paint, not for walls, but for leaves. We mark the medicinal ones, she explains, grinding up dried cochineal beetles, burned husk, and indigo petals into a paste, so we don't mistake them for dinner. She shows you how to paint thin lines along the edges of the useful herbs, delicate stripes of crimson, blue, and even gold. The plants look regal, like royalty in disguise. The colors are made from all natural sources: crushed flowers, stone dust, sap, and the famous cochineal red, harvested from tiny insects that live on cactus petals. The result is vibrant, lasting, and according to some spiritually potent, red calms the fever plants, she says. Blue encourages the sleeping ones. You paint carefully, focused. The herb doesn't flinch. In fact, you're almost certain it leans toward your brush. Modern botanists rarely color code leaves manually anymore, but here it's part of the care, part of the relationship. It's a visual whisper. I see you. I remember what you do. I honor it. You're handed a new leaf, a new color, and a cup of something sweet to sip as you work. It tastes like tamarind and toasted maize. You drink slowly, the way the plants would if they had mouths. In the late afternoon, a small festival breaks out. You didn't expect one, but apparently the first bloom of the red squash is cause for celebration. Someone brings out drums. Someone else juggles beans. A little girl performs a dramatic reenactment of a vine that once grew through her window and stole her sandals. There's food, of course, roasted corn dusted with lime and chili, a strange but delightful cake made from amaranth and honey, small cups of a thick, chocolatey drink with just enough bitterness to make you feel like you're about to remember something important. As you watch the festivities, someone leans over and says, "You know, the plants throw parties too. We just copy them." You raise an eyebrow. The sun and moon dance. The pollen flies. The blossoms open all at once. It's a riot, really. You imagine a squash flower doing a little shimmy under moonlight. You decide that, yes, that probably happens. The celebration winds down just as the sky begins to pinken. Lanterns, clay bowls with floating wicks are lit and placed in the canals, their reflections drifting like glowing petals. You walk the paths slowly, trailing your hand along the painted leaves, the prickly pear fences, the woven walls of the compost hut. Everything glows a little in the fading light. Everything hums, and you think, not for the first time, that these gardeners didn't just cultivate food, they cultivated awe. The next morning, the chinampas are quiet but not empty. You can feel the hush of early thoughts, the kind that gather before anyone speaks. Mist clings low to the ground, curling around squash leaves and lily pads. Somewhere in the reeds, a bird clears its throat with operatic ambition. You've just finished breakfast, a tamale filled with flor de calabaza, and something pleasantly peppery when you're summoned by a woman with the posture of an emperor and the hat of someone who absolutely wins gardening contests without trying. She leads you not to a bed of maize or a stretch of canal, but to a table made of reeds and stone slabs. Upon it, bowls, dozens of them, some filled with beans, others with maize kernels of all colors: blue, white, red, even one that seems to shimmer slightly when the light hits it. "This," she says, "is where we read the market." You blink. "The what?" She gestures to the bowls. "They tell us when to trade, when to plant more, when the valley's about to flood." And she lowers her voice conspiratorially. "Who's going to get into a fight at the next festival?" You raise your eyebrows. She nods solemnly. What follows is an explanation so strange it makes perfect sense. "The Aztecs," she says. believed that plants, particularly staple crops, reacted not only to soil and sun, but also to human moods, celestial cycles, and social tension. If a bowl of beans sprouted too quickly in a shady room, something was off. If the corn bloomed unevenly, brace yourself for drama. If the seeds all pointed in the same direction after soaking overnight, time to plant with enthusiasm. Does it work? You ask. Sometimes better than the priest who sneezes before every eclipse. Anyway, she shows you how to set up a forecast bowl. You fill it with water, drop in 6 kernels from different cobs, and let them sit. Then, she says, you watch. Do they sink? Float? Point east? Multiply overnight due to mysterious reasons no one likes to talk about? You try it. Within an hour, 1 kernel rotates in place, slowly, like it's thinking. Your guide watches it closely and then whispers, interesting. That means the squash will be dramatic this week. Historians still argue whether these seed-watching practices were divination, early plant science, or just cultural play. But like so many things here, the categories blur. These weren't just agricultural methods. They were part of a living system where emotion, pattern, and ritual fed into each other. You're invited to observe a formal market, reading a weekly ritual where elders consult not just weather signs and trade gossip, but the behavior of garden plots. You sit in a circle as bundles of dried herbs are lit, smoke curling in slow spirals. One man holds up a bowl of amaranth and sniffs deeply. Salty, he declares. They're trading fish again. Another woman stirs a jar of fermented maize water and frowns. Too still. The lake's holding back. You can't tell if it's metaphor or meteorology, and you love that it might be both. After the reading, the council discusses what crops to prioritize, which traders to watch for, and whether the bees are moody this week. Your suggestion to ask the bees directly is met with thoughtful nods. Speak gently, someone says. They hold grudges. Later, you visit a small, shaded chinampa plot where several test rows are growing side by side. Maize planted with different companions. One row has beans, another has chilies. A third seems to be trying to raise moss as its child. This, your guide explains, is part of the Aztec approach to sympathetic planting. Some plants like each other, others compete. Maize and beans, he says, married. Chilies and onions, enemies. Squash, loud but helpful. He pulls up a gourd leaf to show how it shelters the soil underneath, keeping it moist. Nearby, a vine has curled protectively around a pepper stem. They talk, he says, without irony. Sometimes they bicker. You help arrange new test rows, alternating crops, adjusting spacing, even sprinkling bits of ash or dried flower petals into the furrows. Each combination is an experiment. Each row might teach something. Modern botanists call this companion planting, and it's now promoted as a sustainable way to deter pests, improve yield, and maintain soil health. But here, it's more than strategy, it's relationship counseling. One gardener even refers to the beans as empathic extroverts. You like that. You're tasked with a delivery. Bring a bundle of sprouted amaranth to a nearby elder who's been working on a fermented grain tonic. You carry it carefully, like a bouquet. The elder, thin and leathery and delighted by your cautious expression, accepts the gift and pulls you into his hut. Inside, dozens of clay pots bubble gently. He hands you a ladle. This, he says, is market math, but tastier. The tonic is faintly sour, slightly sweet, and surprisingly, informative. It tells us when not to trade, when to store, when to dance. It's fermented truth. You sip again. You think it says something about next Tuesday? Historians still argue whether fermented foods were used strictly for sustenance or had a deeper economic role. Some believe they served as season clocks, their bubbling pace indicating environmental shifts. Others think they were just delicious. You settle into a corner with a cup of the tonic, a handful of spiced squash seeds, and a reed mat beneath your knees. Outside, the chinampa wind carries the scent of basil, warm earth, and very opinionated corn. You listen to the canal water lapping gently against the bank, and for just a moment, you swear you hear one of your market beans whisper, "Trade the chilies, not the fish." You nod. Good advice. You're halfway through eating a handful of spiced amaranth seeds, the kind that pop like tiny secrets between your teeth when someone taps you lightly on the shoulder with a broom. You're on fence duty. You glance down at the broom. It's made of bound reeds and small cactus spines. This is not a casual broom. This is a statement. Fence duty, you discover, means tending to the chinampas' natural perimeter defenses, an elaborate network of living walls made not of brick or wood, but of plants. You follow your new instructor, a woman with a voice like polished stone, along the outer edge of one of the older plots. Here, a dense ring of prickly pear cactus, climbing beans, and something that appears to be a vine with a vendetta form the boundary. This, she says, is where the chinampa tells you what it thinks about being interrupted. You raise the broom slightly, as if to salute the fence. The woman nods. Respect is step 1. Step 2 is not bleeding. You get to work. The cactus paddles need trimming, but not too much, just enough to maintain a polite distance between visitor and spine. You clip carefully, using obsidian shears that catch the sun like whispers of lightning. The cut edges ooze clear sap, which you collect in a gourd. It's good for burns, she explains. And stubborn hair. You move along to a stretch of flowering vines woven through the lower half of the fence. Bright trumpet-shaped blooms peek out, some open, some twitching closed as you pass. Your job is to guide the growth, gently looping tendrils around posts and pruning back any shoots that appear to be planning a solo career. The vine resists, then complies. Near the northern edge, you encounter a problem, a small hole in the wall, just big enough for a determined duck or a moderately ambitious raccoon. This is where things get creative, she says, handing you a basket of deterrents. Inside, crushed chili peppers, dried marigold petals, sprigs of pungent herbs, and something that looks suspiciously like powdered toad. You mix them together and sprinkle the blend into the soil, humming slightly because it just feels right. Then you reinforce the area with a new planting of thorny herbs and mutter a short apology to whatever creature just lost its favorite shortcut. Good work, she says. The wall is satisfied. Satisfied, it turns out, is not the same as silent. That evening, as the wind picks up, you hear a faint rustling from the fence line. Not the breeze, not animals, but something between a sigh and a chuckle. You don't ask questions. You nod and thank it for its service. The next morning, you're sent to the healer's plot. This is not your average herb garden. Here, every plant is labeled not by name, but by feeling. One bed is marked cooling sadness. Another reads gentle fire. A third simply says, for when your spirit won't sit still. You're greeted by a man with a face like carved bark and eyes that never quite look at you directly, but always seem to know what you're doing. He hands you a shallow bowl filled with crushed white powder and instructs you to walk slowly around the perimeter of the plot, letting the powder drift down like ash. It tells the plants we're listening, he says. You do as you're told. The healer's plot is quiet, but not empty. Every step seems to thrum with unspoken advice. You pass through beds of yarrow, epazote, mint, and dozens of herbs you can't name but instinctively trust. A vine brushes your shoulder as you pass, and you get the distinct feeling it's checking your pulse. You stop beside a squat bush covered in purple berries. This one, the healer says, pointing, cures insomnia, calms anger, occasionally confuses chickens. He offers you a leaf to chew. It's bitter, then sweet, then oddly reminiscent of rainy Tuesdays. You help prepare tinctures herbs soaked in pulque and sealed in clay jars. Each is labeled not with a word, but with a carved symbol, a sun with one eye closed, a leaf inside a circle, a jaguar with no teeth. Later, you assist with a balancing ritual, a kind of wellness check for both plants and people. The healer lines up small stones, lays bundles of herbs beside them, and hums a slow, looping tune. You're told to do the same. You hum. The plants listen. You think, feel anything? He asks. Lighter, you say, and slightly minty. He smiles. Good. That's the basil. Modern scholars often categorize Aztec healing as a mix of practical herb use and mysticism. But standing here, with your pulse in your ears and the smell of dried lime blossoms in your nose, the line between science and spirit doesn't just blur, it disappears. Historians still argue whether these gardens were more medicinal or ceremonial. But for the gardeners, that debate misses the point. A plant can heal in many ways. By touch, by taste, by memory. Your guide hands you a dried flower and tells you to carry it back to your chinampa. It's for protection, he says, and for sneezing, probably. You walk home slowly, the flower tucked behind your ear. the fence line whispering as you pass, and a quiet scent settling over you like dusk. Back at your plot, you find someone has arranged your tools in a neat line beside a small reed mat. There's food waiting: grilled squash slices, mashed beans, a little bowl of pickled something that might be fruit, or possibly a very ambitious chili. You eat slowly, watching the moon rise. A soft breeze carries the smell of mint, damp soil, and stubborn hope. You lean back, resting your head on a folded cloak, and glance up at the sky. Stars blink on, one by one, like someone shyly turning on the lights. And somewhere, just past the edge of sleep, you hear the fence giggle. You wake to mist again, but this time, it's not lake mist or the kind that clings to squash leaves and your eyelashes with gentle morning intentions. No, this mist is intentional, purposeful, a kind of invitation written in water vapor. Today, you're told you'll be spending time with someone who doesn't call themselves a gardener, or a healer, or even a farmer. They're simply known as the listener, and you don't quite know what that means yet. But you're already wearing your good sandals, just in case. The listener's plot is set back from the main chinampa clusters, where the water narrows and the beds curl like question marks into the reeds. It's quieter here, not silent, but the kind of quiet that asks you not to interrupt it. She greets you with a nod and a woven basket filled with small wooden sticks. Each one, she explains, is a memory marker, a kind of personal calendar made from carved wood, pressed with symbols, feathers, stones, and in one case, what appears to be a chewed piece of tamarind candy. She hands you one. Your symbol is a spiral, roughly etched and then rubbed with blue dust from crushed azurite. This, she says, is your day. You carry it awkwardly for a moment before she gestures for you to place it in the soft mud at the edge of a tiny canal. You do. The stick leans forward slightly, like it's trying to hear something, and then the listener begins walking slowly, one hand outstretched, brushing the tops of herbs, the edge of a corn husk, the side of your sleeve. She doesn't say much, at least not with words. Instead, she guides you through a kind of sensory inventory. She'll stop beside a patch of wild amaranth and ask, "Does this feel generous?" Then move on, at a vine heavy with chili pods. "Is this what readiness smells like?" You answer however you like aloud, in your head, with a shrug. It doesn't matter. The important thing is noticing, listening, and soon you start hearing things you hadn't before. Not voices, exactly, but patterns. The soft complaint of dry soil, the sleepy yawn of a vine that just turned toward the sun, the gurgle of roots drinking. It's overwhelming at first. Too many whispers, too much life packed into every square meter. But you don't run. You stay. You listen. And then you realize this is the point. The listener's role is not to fix anything. Not to pick weeds or stir compost or charm bees with dance, though you suspect she could if she wanted to. Her job is to pay attention, to hear what's too quiet for the busy hands to catch. She shows you her journal, a collection of seed husks, feathers, pebbles, and plant fibers, all tucked into sections of a long roll of bark paper. No writing, just texture, touch, story. Each item represents a moment, a warning, a gratitude. She tells you the wind once changed direction because someone finally apologized to a basil plant. You believe her. She guides you through an afternoon of quiet observation. You trail a finger along the edge of a squash leaf and feel the difference between sun side and shade side. You press your palm to a patch of soil that feels too warm, then realize it's where a snake passed through hours before, leaving behind heat like an echo. The listener smiles. "That squash will bloom early," she says, as if the snake told her directly. You nod, and for the first time, you hear it too. As the day stretches on, you begin to collect your own journal, a yellow leaf curling like a comma, a husk that hums slightly when you shake it, a pebble shaped exactly like a sleeping bird. You tuck them into your pouch like charms, like memories you don't want to write down yet. Later, after a meal of roasted chayote and a drink that tastes like distant lightning and molasses, you help the listener perform the daily sunset pause. It's not a ritual, exactly not in the formal, bell-ringing, incense-swirling way. It's quieter, just two people sitting on a flat stone, facing the maze, not moving, not speaking, just not doing. The wind shifts, the corn rustles, a bee lands on your thumb, then decides against it, and as the sun dips behind the hills, Everything exhales. You feel its soil, leaf, breath, a slow softening, like the garden has taken off its shoes and sunk into a favorite chair. You whisper thank you. The listener doesn't look at you, but she nods. You're starting to speak its language, she says. You smile. You believe her? That night, you sleep under the stars with your pouch of textures beside your head. You dream of vines curling into words, of soil writing poems against your feet. And when you wake, your memory stick is leaning just slightly farther forward than before, listening, always listening. You rise slowly the next morning, not with a start but a stretch, your back curved like a fiddlehead fern unfurling from its curl. The garden hasn't quite noticed you're awake yet. It's still mumbling to itself, a low grumble of leaf rustle and the occasional exasperated duck call. You step barefoot onto the dew-slick path, pouch of textures slung gently across your shoulder, and head straight back toward the listener's plot. She's not there. Instead, you find a single reed whistle tucked into the crook of a small amaranth stalk. You pluck it gently, hold it to your lips, and blow. The sound is soft, high-pitched, and slightly off-key, as if the whistle isn't quite sure it believes in music. But within seconds, a door made of woven twigs creaks open from a nearby shed, and the listener emerges holding a stack of woven mats and what appears to be a jar of pickled watercress. She smiles. We're mapping the dream garden today. This sounds suspiciously poetic, and it is. She spreads out the mats along the bank of the canal, and together you begin to arrange the materials she's collected. Petals of all colors, pieces of bark, seeds, tiny clay figurines, even a small sun-dried fish that seems to be smiling about something long forgotten. This isn't a literal map, she explains. It's how the garden feels, or how it wants to feel. Your job, help shape it. The listener gives you a pouch of amaranth grains and says, mark the places where the roots dream. You stare at the mat, unsure where to begin, but then your hand moves, and you sprinkle 3 lines across the mat's center diagonal. Deliberate, instinctual. That's the maze spiral, she says approvingly. It always starts with maze. Someone else joins you, an elder with a jawline that could chisel granite and a laugh like a collapsing bean sack. He adds a line of crushed marigold petals around your spiral, muttering, for memory. You ask what he means. Marigolds remember the sun, he says. Even when it's not there, you begin to see the mat not as a plan, but as a conversation. Layers of meaning pile up like mulch sweet petals over bitter seeds, rough bark balanced with soft fibers. It's a garden of intention, of intuition. You map the place where the basil hums, the corridor where the frogs always cross. You mark the argument corner, a patch of soil where every vine insists on growing in the opposite direction. You laugh. So does the garden. Later, you help the listener listen to the dream map. It's done with touch, mostly palms flat against the mat, eyes closed, breathing matched to the canal's rhythm. I hear too much. You admit. She nods. That's how you know it's working. You lie there together under the midday haze, reed whistle still tucked behind your ear, and feel the weight of stories built into soil. You ask if this practice, this mapping of the dream, was written about anywhere. She shakes her head. Not in books. Maybe in the way a seedling leans when no one's watching. Scholars still argue whether Aztec gardens were ever meant to be metaphor, or whether the symbols, sun spirals, flower paths, landmarks were just decoration. But here, they are guideposts, compass needles, hints from a soil that's learned to be subtle. And then you see something move across the mat, a single ant. It carries a petal no wider than your thumbnail, walking calmly across your maze spiral, then taking a hard left into the marigold border, before vanishing into the edge of a bark fragment. You trace its path with your finger. The listener smiles. That's tomorrow's answer. The afternoon brings another kind of quiet, this one filled with wind and the whisper of silk. You're brought to the garden's edge again, but this time to a place with no planting beds, no crops, not even herbs, just a stand of tall, feathered grass, broken here and there by poles wrapped in dyed fibers. This, your new guide explains, is the flower wind path. It's used for resting, for remembering, and sometimes for negotiating. You raise an eyebrow. Not every garden problem is solved with a shovel, she says, leading you beneath a low arch formed by bent willow branches. Sometimes you let the wind answer first. The flower wind path is unlike anything you've walked through before. It has no order, no rouse. Flowers lean into the space from all sides, some soft and pale, others dark and spiky, all moving with a choreography that doesn't care whether you're watching. You step carefully, brushing past tufts of columbine and clusters of golden cosmos. The air smells like wet petals and sun-warmed citrus peel. The breeze is different here, warmer, maybe, but also purposeful. You feel like it's moving around you, not through you. Your guide stops before a tall flower stalk with narrow leaves and drooping purple blossoms. This one, she says, only blooms when the wind comes from the west and someone's made peace with their cousin. You blink. That's specific. She shrugs. Gardens are dramatic. You walk together through the path, stopping occasionally to gather spent blossoms, collect seeds, or just listen. Sometimes the flowers bend toward you. Sometimes they seem to shy away. You learn to recognize the difference. A patch of tiny red blooms flares up as you pass. You pause. What's this? She sniffs. Oh, that's start-over flower. You make a note in your head. Collect some later. At the path's end is a shallow bowl carved from volcanic stone, half buried in the soil. It's filled with water and floating petals, some old, some fresh. You're instructed to sit and stir the water gently with your finger. The petals drift. Your guide watches closely. The direction they gather tells us what the garden wants next, she says. You try not to overthink it. You stir, slow and steady, like a spoon in a sleepy cup of tea. The petals begin to spiral clockwise, then cluster near the west side of the bowl. More beans, she nods. Also, less talking near the basil. You chuckle. I'll try. Evening returns, and with it, a kind of hush that sits lower than before. Today was long, full of listening, of not listening, of letting petals speak, and ants write code across a mat of silk and bark. You return to your sleeping mat and lie down, your pouch of textures beside you. The reed whistle glows faintly in the moonlight. Above you, the stars shimmer in arrangements you're starting to understand, not as constellations, but as reflections, as echoes. You look up and see a pattern of stars that mimics your maze spiral. You smile. The air smells like crushed flower wind and the faintest trace of rain yet to fall. And just before sleep takes you, you whisper to the soil beneath your mat. More beans. Less talking near the basil. Got it. The ground hums softly in reply. It starts with a tomato. Not just any tomato, the tomato. Glossy, overconfident, perched on the edge of a chinampa basket, like it owns at least 3 boats and an impressive hat. It wobbles once, ominously, and then, with the slow drama of a fruit that's read too much poetry, it tumbles into the canal with a plop. No one moves. 5 gardeners stop mid-task. One child drops their corn dough. An old man sighs, deeply, as if this were the 4th time today that produce had declared itself too important for gravity. You've stumbled into the tomato debacle of 1471, or rather, its annual reenactment, performed not on a stage, but in the pathways and plots of the gardens themselves. Every year, your guide explains, we remember the day one tomato caused a festival to fall apart, 3 friendships to dissolve, and a courtship to end in accidental marriage. You blink. How? Watch. You're handed a tomato, not the tomato, but a suspiciously similar one, and told to carry it with both hands, very carefully, to the Council of Rooted Affairs, which turns out to be 3 elder women sitting on stools near a hibiscus hedge, embroidering with the kind of intensity normally reserved for duels. You begin walking. Immediately, the wind picks up. You grip the tomato tighter. A duck looks at you. You walk faster. Halfway there, a boy on stilts stumbles past, balancing an enormous squash on his head. You duck the other kind, sidestep a spilled basket of beans, and nearly trip over a philosophical frog who's clearly in no hurry to resolve his existential crisis. You arrive. Tomato intact. The council nods, solemn. The fruit has returned. One says, the debt is repaid. Murmurs another. The basil will speak again. The third adds, you offer the tomato with reverence. They place it in a bowl surrounded by marigold petals and broken bits of clay. Then they all exhale, as if holding their breath had kept history from repeating itself. You are handed a small loaf of amaranth bread and dismissed with honor. The tomato debacle, as the story goes, began with a delivery gone awry. A prized tomato, One of the first hybrid cultivars grown in a particularly boastful chinampa was meant as a gift for the head of the garden council, but it was too ripe, too shiny, too smug. It fell from the basket into the canal, was retrieved by a rival gardener, re-gifted to the wrong elder, and then placed, mistakenly, on the altar of the maize spirit, where it exploded from the heat of the midday sun. The aftermath involved 3 weeks of poetry battles, several unauthorized dances, and one accidental marriage proposal shouted across a duck pond. Historians still debate whether the tale is pure fiction, or if it's based on a real incident cleverly disguised with metaphors and spicy garnish. But the annual observance is taken seriously. This is not just about remembering chaos. It's about honoring how the garden copes with it. You're invited to participate in the next stage of the reenactment, the poetic reconciliation. Each participant must recite one line, improvised, that both forgives the tomato and acknowledges its fatal flaw. You clear your throat. The tomato, bold in blush and pride, forgot the wind speaks sideways. A pause, then applause soft, polite, the kind given to someone who didn't set anything on fire this time. You are handed a basil sprig and told you may now enter the garden of unsaid things. It's quieter here. The garden of unsaid things is nestled between two older chinampas, obscured by tall grasses and a wall of cucumbers that appear to be gossiping. Here, the plants aren't labeled. No signs, no helpful little flags, just rows of green and glint and shadow. You walk slowly, carefully. Every leaf seems to lean in, not to block you but to listen. This is where the regrets grow. Your new guide says, without irony. You nod solemnly, which is the only appropriate response when someone tells you you're walking on a metaphor. The plants here are strange. One has leaves that curl in on themselves when you breathe too loudly. Another gives off a scent that changes every few steps. First sweet, then bitter, then like memory dipped in citrus. You reach to touch a vine and your guide stops you. That one holds grudges. You pull your hand back, fast. The garden of unsaid things is part therapy, part journal, part archive. Here, gardeners plant words they didn't say, decisions they didn't make, apologies they couldn't find the voice for. The belief is that these things unspoken, unresolved still need soil, need air, need a place to root and rot and maybe, just maybe, turn into something useful. You're handed a packet of seeds and asked to walk alone. No instructions, just plant. So you do. You kneel beside a patch of soft earth and press 3 seeds into the ground. You don't know what they are. They might grow into something edible, or something prickly, or something that hums at night. You don't say anything, but somehow, the garden hears you anyway. Afterward, you return to the central chinampa, your steps slower now. Thoughtful, you're greeted by an elder named Teko, who wears a necklace of dried flowers and a hat made entirely of woven grass. He hands you a gourd bowl filled with chilled water and a few floating sprigs of mint. Drink, he says. It clears the afterthoughts. You sip. It does. Tico invites you to join him for a walk through the memory bed's rows of plants grown not for food, or medicine, or even beauty, but for remembering. Some of these, he says, pointing to a tall stalk with silver-striped leaves, only sprout when an old story is retold nearby. Others respond to song, to tears, to laughter. There's even a section of maize that leans slightly west every time someone recalls a forgotten name. The memory beds are tended differently. No compost, no tools, just presence. Each gardener who visits walks slowly, offers a whisper, maybe leaves a token behind an old seed pod, a broken spoon, a button. You leave a strip of bark from the dream map in section 11. It curls slightly, then uncurls. Accepted. Teko smiles. You're part of the garden now, he says. You nod and feel a small shift in your chest. Not a bloom, not a root, something quieter, like a tomato easing off a branch just before it gets too proud. The sun begins to dip again. Shadows stretch long across the canal, and the ducks return to their gossip circles. You settle beside a cluster of squash flowers, now folded closed for the night like little papery secrets. Dinner is quiet, just you, Tico, and 2 other gardeners, fresh tortillas, beans, and a salsa so smoky it smells like a campfire having a deeply personal moment. You eat slowly. Teko tells you the story of the gourd who refused to be soup. It hid in the shade for years until it was discovered and turned into a water jug. Not every end is a failure, he says, dipping his tortilla. You think of the tomato. You smile. That night, you return to your mat with the basil sprig still tucked behind your ear and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the things we drop in the canal don't disappear. They float. They ferment. They become stories. And eventually, with time and sunlight, they feed someone else. It begins with a whisper. Not the soil this time. Not the corn. Not the listening vines who sometimes hum lullabies to sleeping squash. This whisper comes from the water. You're standing on the edge of the chinampa at dawn, the world still wrapped in fog and yesterday's loose threads, when a ripple breaks across the canal. Just a whisper of motion, like someone exhaling below the surface. You lean forward, the ripple widens, then stillness again. Your guide today is already standing beside you. You didn't hear her arrive. She's draped in blue, every shade of it, from lake glass turquoise to the dark navy of pre-storm skies. Her eyes match the canal, calm, unreadable. She simply says, "We're going looking for what?" She smiles. For the garden that vanished. And without another word, she begins walking along the canal's edge, the fog parting gently in her wake like it knows better than to resist. The story of the lost royal garden, as she explains between measured steps, is older than the oldest chinampa, older even than the tallest maize legend. It begins, as many things do, with pride. There was once a ruler, not a king, not an emperor, just someone whose name meant moonlight on stone. This ruler loved gardens, more than war, more than gold, more than even praise. So they built one, not just any garden, a perfect garden, built on water. It floated not on reed rafts, but on rafts of song and silk and dreams. The canals around it were perfumed. The maize never aged. The flowers whispered poetry in languages no one spoke anymore. Every vine bore fruit. Every fruit peeled itself. It was said that to walk its paths was to forget all hunger. But perfection true. Lingering perfection is a fragile thing. People began to change in its presence. Some refused to leave. Others forgot their families. Some even forgot their own names. The ruler, heart heavy, gave one final order. Let it vanish. And it did. One night, the garden lifted into the fog and was never seen again, except sometimes on mornings like this, when the mist thickens and the canal sings in minor keys. Pieces of it return. You follow the guide in silence. The fog thickens, the water stills, and suddenly, you're not walking beside a canal anymore. You're walking through it. A path rises beneath your feet, impossibly dry. On either side, rows of plants begin to appear, not real ones, not exactly, silhouettes, echoes. You reach out toward a flower shaped like a question. Your hand passes through. They're remembering you. Your guide says, the dream garden, because that's what it feels like, is immense. It stretches in all directions, its boundaries undefined. Petals drift upward. Trees hum with no branches. The sky looks like paper held against candlelight. You pass plots filled with impossible crops, golden chayotes, translucent beans, maize that glows faintly blue. You see a tree growing books. You see a squash with a door carved into it. You don't try to open it. Your guide leads you to a central pond. Its surface is mirror smooth. When you look in, you don't see your face. You see a garden, not this one, not the chinampa, yours, from before. The one you thought you imagined as a child. The rows of carrots you once arranged like constellations. The old fig tree that never fruited but always listened. The moss patch where you buried a broken spoon and called it a ritual. You exhale. The garden in the water nods, just once, then fades. Your guide places a smooth stone in your hand. It's warm. Now you can return, she says. You step back, and with that, the dream garden begins to dissolve. The silhouettes blur. The path softens. The fog thickens. And suddenly, you're standing at the edge of the canal again, the water rippling gently at your toes. You look down at the stone. It's gone, but your hand still feels full. You're quiet the rest of the morning. The garden seems to understand. The ducks keep their gossip soft. The maize stands taller, less nosy. Even the squash flowers wait until later to unfurl. You're invited to visit a ceremonial plot, not one for growing, but for remembering. Here, each plant is tied to an ancestor, a lost friend, a forgotten place. The caretakers tend the plot without speaking. They move like music. You help water the plants using not buckets or scoops, but cloth soaked in lake water, gently wrung out over the roots with care and apology. Each drop feels deliberate. Your guide here is a man who wears 2 tunics, one inside out. You don't ask why. He tells you anyway. One's for the living, one's for the vanished. You nod. He shows you a small plant, no taller than your knee. Its leaves shimmer slightly, even in shadow. This one, he says, grew from a seed someone forgot to bury, but it remembered anyway. You help him prune the dried leaves. He hands you a pair of shears made from bone and shell. They are dull. You don't mind. Each cut takes longer, but each one feels more real. As you finish, he offers you a single leaf from the shimmering plant. For your pocket, he says, in case the dream garden calls you again. Afternoon brings sunlight and song. A group of children is practicing wind chimes. Yes, practicing them. Each child carries a cluster of reeds, shells, or polished clay discs tuned to different notes. They walk slowly through the chinampas, adjusting pitch and placement, letting the wind conduct them. You join. Your chime is made from hollowed-out bean pods strung together with maize silk. It makes a sound like tiny exclamations. You love it immediately. Together, you all walk through the plots, letting the wind decide the melody. Gardeners smile as you pass. One elder claps in rhythm. The corn seems to sway a little more dramatically. Every garden has a song. One child tells you, "We're just reminding it." You nod. You believe them. As the sun lowers, you're invited to visit a special place rarely opened. Only when the garden agrees. It's a floating room, constructed from bundled reeds and anchored to the chinampa by woven ropes. It sits just off the main path, gently bobbing in the canal. Inside, everything is curved walls, floor, ceiling, no corners, no hard lines, just softness. This, you're told, is the resting room for wandering thoughts. You step inside. It smells of honey and cedar. A single window shows only sky. You lie down on a mat shaped like a spiral. Your hand still tingles where the dream garden touched it. There are no questions here, just breath. Just stillness. You feel your heart slow. Your bones soften. You remember a leaf you once lost in the wind. You hear it land. Outside, the garden hushes for the night. And for the first time, you don't dream. Because you're already in one. There's a buzz in the air this morning. Not the usual insect hum or sleepy rustling of squash leaves brushing against one another like gossiping sleeves. This is organized buzzing. Purposeful. Determined. Slightly over-caffeinated. You look up and immediately spot the reason. Bees. Thousands of them. Not swarming. Not aggressive. Just busily orchestrating a kind of airborne traffic system above the chinampa, complete with flight paths, holding patterns, and what might be a pollen-based toll booth. Your new guide for the day appears beside you, already wearing a netted shawl and carrying a bowl of dried guava chips. Pollinators, she says, offering you a chip. They run the show. We just maintain the stage. You follow her toward a series of raised platforms draped with vines and punctuated with bright flowers, squash, basil, hibiscus, and other bloomers too strange to name. You notice something odd. The bees don't visit every plot equally. Some areas buzz with activity. Others are passed over like salad at a dessert buffet. We've learned to listen to the bees. Your guide says they have opinions. You're not surprised anymore. Of course they do. She hands you a small scroll. It's a bee ledger, a record of which crops received visits, how often, and during which wind directions. It's not scientific in the way a modern textbook might define it, but it's detailed. It even includes a category labeled "Bees seemed suspicious." Why don't they visit every plot? You ask. Politics, she says with a straight face, and preference. Some bees won't work if the wind smells like burning squash. Some are partial to music. Others follow individual gardeners. We've had bees boycott whole beds after a bad poem. You're about to ask if she's joking when a bee zooms past, does a tiny midair loop near your ear, and veers off toward the peppers. You say nothing. Later that morning, you're taken to a platform where bee-attracting herbs are grown specifically for negotiation. Yes, negotiation. You're told to sit in the center of a circle made of basil, lavender, marigold, and epazote. It smells like you're about to be very spiritually cleansed or lightly pickled. Your task, softly, consistently, as the bees approach. You're instructed to adjust your tone based on their movement. If one circles your head, your guide says, go up half a note. If two land near your feet, lower the pitch. If three do a synchronized loop around your elbow, just stop. They're clearly in charge. It's a bizarre exercise, but oddly soothing. You hum. The bees hover. One bumps gently into your forehead, like punctuation. Then they leave. And somehow, the squash behind you looks more vibrant. You take a break beside the water, legs dangling over the edge, watching the canal drift by like it has better places to be, but isn't in a rush. A boy approaches, carrying a stick topped with a series of small gourds, each one drilled with tiny holes. He dips the whole thing into a bowl of syrupy juice and holds it upright. Bee recorder, he says. You blink. It plays. Bees. No, he giggles. It feeds bees, but it looks like music. You watch as several bees land on the gourds, delicately sipping from the holes. The gourds sway gently, creating a sound not unlike wind chimes filtered through pollen. They come here when the wind's too rude elsewhere, he explains. You nod solemnly. Later, you're introduced to the butterfly monitors, two older women who have tracked butterfly migration patterns for decades, using sheer observation and what they call intuition spreadsheets. You ask what that means. They hand you a leaf, today's note. One says, you hold it up. It's been bitten in a perfect spiral. Swallowtail, she says, westbound, probably offended. You learn that butterflies have loyalties, certain flowers, certain gardeners. Some only appear when marigolds bloom next to wild beans. Others land only on sun-warmed stones. Still others seem to follow gossip more than nectar. They're drawn to unfinished stories, the other monitor says, especially ones with happy middles. You don't question it. You wouldn't dare. That afternoon, you join a gathering at the pollen round table. It's not a table. It's a circle of logs beneath a fig tree where gardeners gather to exchange stories about which plants are making, which moves. You listen as one woman describes her sunflowers refusing to face east unless greeted in rhyme. Another swears her pepper plants only bloom when bees land on her shoulder first. A young man, clearly new, timidly raises a hand. My beans bloomed, he says. The circle goes quiet. I didn't plant any beans. He finishes. Someone in the back whispers, a pollen prophecy. You're then handed a tiny, feather-light notebook made from pressed flower petals and taught how to record pollinator politics. There are no rules, only observations. You draw two bees arguing over a hibiscus, a butterfly landing on the same tomato twice, a hummingbird that pauses mid-flight to sneeze. It all means something. Someone says, you nod, even though you're not sure what, but you feel it. The rhythm of the garden has changed, not louder, just sharper, more precise, as though the air is writing something, and you finally started learning the alphabet. Toward evening, you're taken to the quiet plots. Here, no one walks, no one speaks. Even the bees seem muted. These are the wind-kept beds areas where wind patterns are used to pollinate without assistance. Your guide explains the technique. The maze knows when to let go. The tassels release pollen into the breeze, but only when the air is still curious. You nod slowly. There's something profound about the idea that wind can carry intention. You're handed a brush made from maize silk and reed fiber. Your task, help the breeze. You gently tap the tassels of a tall maize stalk, releasing a faint golden mist that drifts sideways into the next row. You do this again and again, and slowly you realize you're not helping the wind. You're learning how to be it. You move through the rows like a breeze with fingers, brushing each tassel, catching the dust, passing it along. By the time the sun touches the horizon, your hands shimmer faintly with gold. The final task of the day is ceremonial. You're asked to place a single petal on the altar of pollinators, a floating platform surrounded by marigolds, and set adrift in the canal. You choose a pale purple blossom that trembles slightly in your fingers. You walk to the platform. You lay it down, and just as your fingers leave it, a bee lands atop the petal, curls its legs beneath itself, and stays. The canal carries them both away. Your guide nods. Approved. That night, as you settle onto your mat beneath the stars, you hear the garden buzz not loudly, not urgently, just a low, satisfied hum. It moves through the maze, around the squash, across the fences. It touches your chest, your cheek, your breath. And for the first time, you feel not like a visitor, not like a helper, but like pollen just passing through, but essential. You wake to silence, not absence, not emptiness, just silence. The kind that comes only when everything is exactly where it should be. The chinampas are still. Even the ducks seem to be sleeping in. The usual chorus of wind and bees and soft gossiping leaves has hushed itself, like the garden is holding its breath. Your final day begins not with a task, but a question. A gardener you've never met before. A woman with salt white braids and a shawl that smells faintly of roasted corn hands you a small gourd cup filled with warm maize drink. It tastes like memory soaked in cinnamon. She sits beside you on the edge of the canal and asks, "What will your garden carry when you go?" You pause, not because you don't know, but because the question has already rooted itself somewhere deep, just above your ribs and just below the place where stories settle. You sip, then you begin your answer. The day unfolds not as a series of jobs or lessons, but as a gentle farewell. The chinampas have no interest in ceremony or grandeur today. Instead, they invite you quietly, without obligation, to walk through all the places you've seen, to touch the familiar rows, and leave behind the version of you who first arrived. You begin with the compost hut. It still hums softly, its piles steaming in the morning cool. You greet the worm. Senor Wiggle is nowhere to be seen, but you feel his presence like an approving eyebrow raised somewhere below the soil line. You leave behind your old seed pouch empty now, crinkled from use. You tuck it beneath a layer of drying maize husks. A gardener nods as you do. Compost loves stories, she says. Next, the tomato shrine. The bowl of marigold petals is fuller today. The tomato at the center is fresher, plumper, and if you're being honest, less arrogant. You offer it a basil sprig and whisper, "Thanks for the drama." One of the council elders chuckles from across the path. In the dream map clearing, the mats are rolled up, but a small corner of bark has been left behind, inked faintly with a spiral and a single, tiny footprint. You add a pebble, one you've carried since the lost garden. It feels like closing a door, but gently, with a soft cloth to catch the latch. The listening vines greet you with a soft brush against your shoulder. The soil beneath them pulses once as you step across it. Your memory stick planted on your first day is now surrounded by shoots of something green and curling. You don't know what it is. That's perfect. At the water's edge, the floating platform of the pollinators drifts by. A single bee buzzes in slow loops overhead. You raise a hand. It doesn't land, but it hovers just long enough to count as a wave. By late afternoon, you're invited to the circle of going. It's not a ritual, not really, more like a picnic, but with more staring into middle distance and fewer crunchy snacks. Everyone who's leaving or has decided they've arrived enough is invited to sit. No one speaks at first. The silence is companionable, a shared understanding that gardens, like people, are never truly finished. A woman places a flower behind your ear. You don't ask what kind. You already know it smells like goodbye, and something sweet that lingers. A child gives you a reed. "Breathe through it," she says, so you remember to move slow when you go back. You do. The air tastes like water and dust and time. The last light stretches long across the canals. You walk one final path, not knowing where it ends, just trusting that if it's meant to, it'll circle back. You pass the fence of prickly pear. A single segment has bloomed, just one, just now, a bright pink blossom wide as your palm. You stop, touch the bloom, gently. It doesn't flinch, and neither do you. Night has returned, slowly, softly, wrapping itself around the chinampas like a warm reed blanket. The stars blink into place. No hurry, no fuss, just gentle reminders that the world still turns. You lie on your mat for the final time, hands resting on your chest, the scent of mint and damp earth rising from your sleeves. The wind is slow tonight, tired, maybe, or just full. You hear a frog. Distantly, a few last rustles from the maize, the tiny splash of a duck settling into its own dreams. Your breath slows, your thoughts scatter, and in the darkness, the garden begins to murmur one last time. It tells you that nothing is truly lost here, that every dropped tomato becomes a story, every whisper becomes compost, and every goodbye plants the seed of something else. You smile, eyes closed now, drifting. You see petals falling in slow spirals. You feel the soil warm beneath your fingertips. You dream of leaves that remember your name, and somewhere in the garden, a vine leans toward the wind, ready to grow. End of script. Sweet dreams.